Well, thanks very much. Yeah. It's called collaboration, I guess. Yeah. Okay, so Rihanna said it all, and I'd like to talk to you about the evolution in the last few years, maybe the last 4 or 5 years, and how this whole thing is coming together. All the stars are aligning to actually start doing something really significant in medical devices, medical device innovation, medical device manufacturing. So let's go from there. There, okay. So in 2013, some of you may know, I was with the MRC then and running the Innovation Center, and it was going through rather a turbulent time of transformation and so-called change management. In other words, get out the machine guns and get rid of a whole lot of people. In that period of rather of uncertainty and angst that the MRC was living through, because it had become rather bushy in its growth, the mission there was a lot of mission creep, and it needed to, the MRC tree needed to be trimmed. In that period, the DST managed to put some medical device platforms into the MRC, and we were able to really scale up the innovation portfolio in the MRC. Besides just doing research and handing money into the universities to do, PhDs, MScs, peer-reviewed publications, and so on, which is important. But there had to be this translation of research, because the MRC mission was to improve the health of the country, and you don't improve the health of the country just that way. You improve the health of the academic, right? So the idea was that you had to translate this research, and so SHIP was born. The next year, I was somehow instrumental in managing to initiate a partnership between the MRC and PATH, USA PATH Seattle. This is the Program for Appropriate Technology in Health. They are an organization of about 40 years old, non-profit, that have done extensive work in medical devices, diagnostics, drugs, vaccines, and systems, those 5 pillars, throughout the developing world, and they've got about 25 offices in different countries. They've got about 5 or 6 offices in Africa alone, 1 in Rosebank and Joburg. These in-country offices, and their mission is to try and take the best of the West, repurpose it, or develop new technologies which are needed and place them where they need to be placed. Focus on maternal and child health, public health specifically, with a focus also, of course, on TB and HIV and now non-communicable diseases. So the MRC the PATH wanted to actually start an innovation hub, or such passé words, but let's call it an impact lab, to be a little bit more current and less using those hubs and innovation terminologies, which are still relevant but rather overused, here to help drive the sector locally, realizing that this could happen in places like India, China, South Africa, where the technology and the scientists exist to enable stuff to be developed locally rather than in Washington or the States somewhere. So the MRC linked with PATH, and they formed the Global Health Innovation Accelerator, GEAR, as the name for that partnership, focusing on primary healthcare technologies and specifically medical devices. We've heard a lot in the last day and a half about how the CSIR has started. I don't know if it was in 2015. Rian embarks on developing a product innovation platform, which includes product lifecycle management, business intelligence, quality management systems to help grow the sector through innovation. Then there has, last year, there was the formation of the Medical Device Stakeholders Forum, made up of numerous stakeholders. In other words, getting all the role players together: CSIR, TIA, DTI, DST, Department of Health, Medical Device Manufacturers South Africa, Western Cape Cluster of Medical Devices, and non-profits and university technology transfer offices, biomedical engineering departments. A really inclusive group of people and entities that could really collaborate to promote this, the growth of the sector and the growth of innovation in the medical device space. 2016, TIA, I don't know about the date, probably 2016, through TIPS, the Technology Innovation Platform, and as part of the NDMSF, became a very important player to drive medical device innovation through this TIPS value chain approach. So all the role players have been put together, and I think there's a lot of excitement about really taking this Cinderella industry, the medical device industry, and making it grow like the pharma industry in this country, or the automobile manufacturing industry in this country, and do something with it. The engineers are in place, everything's in place. We've just got to get this system working. So you've heard a lot in the last day and a half as well about this fourth industrial revolution that Klaus Schwab introduced in the World Economic Forum last year, about the digital revolution and the convergence of technologies, and how society's business and even the human body could be embedded with these things, so we all become so-called Internet of devices or Internet of things. You know, we walk around with our wearables, and this is in the field of, and this has now resulted in emergence of critical fields like robotics and genomics, biosensors, wearables, artificial intelligence, IoT, quantum computing, and big data, predictive analytics, etc. And then in the manufacturing space, we also have this massive change of how things are manufactured, all digitally driven now through additive manufacturing or 3D printing. And then again, we have advanced materials coming through at a rapid pace, nanotechnology and other advanced materials. So there's a whole lot happening, and all of these things can be utilized in the medical device industry. So can the medical device innovators and the local medical device manufacturers collaborate in this environment and adapt to this change that's hitting us? Certainly we've sort of got ourselves aligned for it by pulling all the partners together and the stakeholders together, and the idea is hopefully we can. I hope to be able to answer that question. So the innovators, as I've defined them, are mainly the universities, the CSIR, you know, the higher education institutions, associated technology transfer offices, and so on. Medical doctors who are at the coalface in the office, in the hospitals, often see a problem and can articulate this, and you even have some non-profits who are involved, like Gembi, for example, in Cape Town, and others who are involved in doing quite cutting-edge novel research into systems and so on, and in the medical device space. Then there's the medical device manufacturers, a disparate group. We're trying to pull that together through the MDMSA and the Western Cape Cluster. Tanya's on the far left there, but one is very active in supporting us in this through SAMED, and they're about, I don't quite know the number, and when I ask the question, I say, how many medical device companies are there in this country? And the number varies quite a lot, but it's, let's say, it varies from 500 to 150. We don't really know, because there are a whole lot of small players out there, and we just don't know how to count them all, and that needs to be done. So let's say approximately 200, with about 50 rather well-established ones that are trading, exporting, and doing some good work. But we certainly need to actually understand that sector much better, and actually be able to document who's doing what and what they're doing, and are they exporting, and do they have their ISO requirements in place, and so on. I think what I really want to say here is that just with all this impacting on us at the moment, it just cannot be business as usual for the medical device space and the innovators. The focus is going to be, in my prediction, it should be, is going to be, and what the new technologies and fourth industrial revolution, as we call it, enables, is to be able to have point of care devices. So our focus should be on point of care, right place, immediate or answers within a few hours, right? It has to be right sizing. There's always this global obsession, and I think many of us are trapped in this global thinking that everything has to be about scaling and about growth. I don't think that is necessarily the case. We can right size, with modern manufacturing technologies, we don't have to make an injection mold so that we can make a million pieces, but we can only start off by selling 50. It just doesn't scale, it doesn't make sense. So you need to be, with modern manufacturing technologies, you can make 50 and get them in the market. Cost a little bit more than the injection molds, but you don't have to have that massive expense to get that scale. So scale and growth, we need to just reconsider those concepts. Rapid manufacturing, personalized prosthetics and products, and personalized devices. And in a similar, for example, in genomics, we talk about precision medicine and pharmaceuticals, precision medicine. Okay, so we need to join those two people. Right, you might recognize this guy. That's Heinrich van der Merwe from Vaal University of Technology with one of our devices in place. The device on the left is a secure airway clamp for safer anesthesia. It looks like a torture thing, doesn't it? But it's not. That little ratchet in the front is for the endotracheal tube to go in. There you see Heinrich with the device in his mouth. To actually make a mold for that is going to be very expensive, as you can imagine. We want to get this on the market imminently. We've got patents, everything's in place, but we need to make, say, 100 of these things. So what are we going to do? We're going to make a couple of hundred using 3D printing. We're going to trial it at Universitas, and then we'll make whatever we need to make until the growth of the business. We'll make everything using 3D printing technologies. And it'll be cheaper that way than to then go on to injection molding. Once the company gets traction, if it does, then yes, then we'd need to consider going into injection molding once you start exporting and so on. So that's the beauty of the modern manufacturing technologies. Many of you would have seen this. Central University of Technology are really in the forefront. You might have seen the Carte Blanche episode probably a couple of months ago, I can't remember, where they've done mandibular implants of patients with jaw cancer, with facial cancers, and they're able to actually do a CT scan. They're actually able to get a CAD image of that to print out mandibular and then implant it. And 3 patients represented here to just give you an idea of the facial look on the left and the rather smiley, much nice, good-looking face on the right. I mean, that's the life-changing, facial-changing technologies that we're looking at with the titanium implanted jawbone. Here's another one. Just look at the left, top and bottom, before and after picture. I mean, it is. Can you imagine having cancer in your face and having to walk around with your face looking like someone's, like a footballer sitting inside your mouth? It's just, I'm sure you can imagine. So, and that prosthetic that was made, you can see it's an amazing thing, and that gets implanted. And this lady has now got her life back, essentially, thanks to Ferry Boyson and his team at CUT. Now, then, from point of application to point of care, I'm very close to a company in Cape Town called Genomics. They realized some while back, about 7 years ago, when they formed their company, that they're not going to be able to compete in the lab space. The technologies are changing too quickly, and so they decided at that time that they would move into the interpretation of the data space, so that they would like to look at all the variables in low penetrance genes, not the high penetrance ones. You know that if you've got a high penetrance gene, you're going to get the pathology, you're going to get the disease, so that's a pretty straightforward one-to-one correlation. But in low penetrance genes, you have to consider family history, you have to environmental factors, diet, exercise, genetics, and pathology primarily. So it's pathology supported, so it's a whole spectrum from genetics to from phenotype, from genotype to phenotype, and including all the other variables that come in the way. So they went into trying to understand how these genes move across with all these other factors built in, family history, etc., and result in disease. At the same time, there's this point of application device that's been developed by LGC in Britain, It's a shoebox size technology. It does. It can do genetic panel testing in half an hour. So you've got 20 SNPs that you have a little cassette that's made up of the panel of these genes. Within half an hour, they can be analyzed. It usually took about a week to 2 weeks to get this. Now it becomes point of care. So what genomics did was saying these are the panels I want, and in breast cancer it's a BRCA and another panel of 20 SNPs. Non-communicable disease panel. So we've got these two panels, they can fit into this machine, and literally at site, a woman with breast cancer, or it can be expanded to non-communicable diseases in general, cardiovascular, diabetes, or other cancers, but this is focused specifically on breast cancer. They can come in, they can have their BRCA test done and their NCD test done to see if there is genetic influence in their disease. And at the same time, in that half an hour, while the test is chugging through to get the results, half an hour, it's very rapid, you can capture all the other data like family history and pathology and blood chemistry and blah, 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 and diet and exercise and all that stuff, and you can integrate it, and within half an hour this information is fed up to the website or the cloud, and a report, a fully comprehensive report can be available, so within an hour at site. I mean, until this, it takes 2 weeks. We haven't done this yet. The South Africa UK Newton grant has been given. This is what will be done in the next year and a half, 2 years, and hopefully we're going to be able to have at a single appointment have all this information within an hour and a half, an hour. So that's the way things are moving. Then there's a very exciting piece of technology that's been floating around the universities. There's a company called Nanopore in UK and come out of Oxford that can now do genome sequencing at incredibly low cost. I mean, this device that we see on the left, the size of a pencil, costs $1,000, and it can do whole exome sequencing and whole genome sequencing. It can do long chain sequencing, so you just got to do it repeated times. So it's unbelievable, the technology that's coming in. So we can have our genomes, we'll soon be able to have our genome sequenced for very, very low cost, leading to precision medicine. However, now in terms of the medical device, these are medical devices incidentally, but maybe not the medical devices we normally think about, this genetic medical device stuff. So now into medical device regulations. So in 1965, there was the Act 101. It was about pharmaceuticals. It was about drugs. It didn't look at medical devices. 1993 in Europe, they started looking when the EU started forming, and they started looking at how to regulate medical devices. So it started there. And then in 2016, there was a modification to the Act 101 of 1965 to include medical devices. And now we've gone through we've got the Act, and the regulations and the guidelines are now being propagated. And it's all based on the European model, because we have to conform, there has to be conformity and harmonization, but it comes, unfortunately, at European costs. So one of the biggest challenges, so we need to address regulatory and quality management issues, and one of the biggest challenges with respect to medical devices and the diagnostic industry are those relating to regulatory and quality management issues. And this especially applies to startups, spin-out companies, startups, small SMMEs. They need now to adhere to the regulatory environment that we now find ourselves in. There's no such thing as bootstrapping anymore on a shoestring, borrowing money from friends and family and fools, as they say, but you just can't afford it, because your ISO 13485 can cost you R500,000. Your CE mark can cost you another bundle of money. You've got to get auditors from overseas. So there's all sorts of problems. But what is the purpose of regulations? They are important to have, but because we have to Europe has created the level, the bar at which these regulations have to come through in, and the big companies there are always raising the bar. It's a form of protectionism, I guess. But the medical devices depend on two things. It's pre-market review that contributes to product control and post-market surveillance. And then there's the third element. So it's got to be safe, and it's got to be efficacious. It's got to work. And then there's a third element, which is the user labeling, advertising, and training of the device for the users. So barriers, especially for startups and small companies: European standards of safety and performance accepted as the benchmark, requiring European certification at European costs. Or if it's FDA, it's dollar costs. There are no notified bodies in South Africa. No little testing infrastructure for medical devices in South Africa. So the product safety standards that we need to comply with, we have to go overseas to get these. Biocompatibility and performance has to get them tested in overseas laboratories. Local manufacturers, staff and suppliers have very little knowledge. So you go to a small company and you say, do you have these ISO qualifications? Most of them wouldn't know, have heard of them. Many of them wouldn't have heard of them, but now they have to know about them. They wouldn't know where to begin. The local regulators followed the historical Act 101 medicines control approach, so they're trying to harmonize, trying to combine the way they regulate pharmaceuticals with and do the same with medical devices. The fit is not good. Maintaining regulatory compliance, many of the established medical device companies have 2 or 3 people full-time, just looking after their regulatory compliance. How does a startup company or a small company deal with the situation? It's incredibly difficult. So we have to find ways around this. We have to find a way around it. And I've been encouraged to know that one of the potential ways, one of the potential supports for this has been this initiative by Rian and Peter and others, NICI at the CSIR, which is through this product lifecycle management initiative, which has gained lots of strength and support from Siemens and SEQ. What's it? I forget the name of the company. Yeah, but there's been a real convergence of energy put into trying to enable product lifecycle management to be, and medical devices is one of the key areas where this could be applied, and that they have chosen to apply it to, which is good news. But it's not going to be, it's not going to solve the problem on its own. It's going to be part of the solution, which is great. So, is it possible that could the regulator not, for example, could local manufacturers, to give local manufacturers some advantage over international manufacturers, and who then export their product into our country? Just to give you some idea, there's a 90-10% trade imbalance, and I think you mentioned that. It's about 15 billion rand trade deficit because we import 90% of our medical devices. We need to change that. So surely the regulator should consider some ways of supporting local manufacturing. But they haven't seemed to. The barriers are for the external and the locals are very similar. In fact, in many ways, it seems like the external manufacturers and the local distributors that import these products, in my opinion, are slightly favoured. But I don't know where that seesaw actually lies. But I suspect they're favoured. They shouldn't be. The local manufacturers should actually have advantage. They should be exempt from license fees. Because the large, the importers or the distributors, there's 90%, there's a massive amount of money flowing into the regulator from imports alone, from the distributors. And that could be an offset to enable give the local manufacturers some advantage over the external manufacturers. Other countries like India, for example, just put up trade barriers, massive trade barriers. So you either go and manufacture in the country at the cost there, or you have to pay a 40% premium to get your product into the country, which then prices you out the market. We also need, can the DTI, for example, not provide training of local regulatory auditors so that companies don't have to fly in international auditors at large cost, put them up in hotels, usually business class air tickets, good hotels, costs a lot of money to get the auditors to come out and evaluate your premises and your quality control. Funding support for QMS, for quality management systems, especially to startups and companies with innovative medical devices. I mean, it's an expensive exercise to get ISO 13485. There needs to be some support, especially for these small companies. Can we not establish some basic accreditation facilities locally instead of having to send everything offshore? I know Jeremy Wallace and myself with the Umbiflow device, we were sending our sensors overseas to get tested to make sure that the ultrasonic radiation wasn't above acceptable limits of safety. So how do we connect the MD innovators and manufacturers in this complex ecosystem and meet the needs of the stakeholders? Just a quick look at the ecosystem here. A few people have helped me to put this together, Tanya and others. And basically, the dotted green lines are the pathways that feed in to local manufacture. For example, global markets, global needs, and so on. But what we really want to focus on at this moment is how the innovators on the right-hand side can feed into the manufacturers optimally and connect up. And at the moment, they're very siloed. So the medical device manufacturers don't actually know what technologies are being developed in the universities or the science councils. They don't have access. They don't know what platforms exist, what manufacturing skills exist. Conversely, the innovators don't know what technologies and who to approach when they have a technology in the technology transfer office. Which local company do we go to that has the skill set needed to take our technology to market? So there's a big disconnect that needs to be put in place. And finally, so how are we going to help do something here? We've embarked through MDMSA and the MRC and GEAR and our Medical Device Stakeholder Forum, TIER and others, and the DTI. We're setting up a project to help grow the local medical device innovation and manufacturing ecosystem. But first of all, we need to understand what the domain is like, what the landscape is like. So when you hear another landscaping exercise, everyone says, oh no, more surveys, more filling in forms. I'm not interested in that. We're not going to go that route because we don't want to have anyone with survey fatigue. We get too many of those things. But we do need a list of companies and what they do, the R&D that they're engaged in, their manufacturing skills, do they import, do they export, and their distribution capacity, types of products, certification and technical. We need this information, their competencies, their training requirements, the challenges they're facing. We need that information. And in terms of the HERs and the innovators, the medical device companies need to know, can they do some of the R&D for us? What platforms are existing in the universities for technology, for example, this additive manufacturing, like at CUT and CSIR, the titanium sinting and so on for making prosthetics. We need to know that. The medical device companies also need to know what is sitting on the shelves at the universities. People develop a technology to get their PhD, they put the product on the shelf and they move on to something else. How many technologies are sitting on the shelf that could go somewhere? Probably many are redundant, but they could, let's say 10% of them could actually turn into viable products, but they just don't get out the door. So this information needs to be captured and known, and hopefully the objective here is to share this information ultimately when it's captured, and I'm hoping to do this in the next six months to a year, get this whole thing, this whole system working together so that the DTI can understand what's being exported, the DST can understand what innovations are taking place, the medical device industry, medical device manufacturers can understand what's going on in the HEIs and vice versa to really get this system cohesive and to grow it. And hopefully through Morocco, I believe they're developing this web portal with some funding from DST, which is a very generic thing. It's not only for medical devices, but medical devices can have a section of that, can utilize this and have its own space in this portal for connecting the stakeholders, specifically the innovators and the medical device manufacturers, and helping to grow this sector. That's it. Thank you.